it doesn't matter how much actually forests we conserve at the moment if we don't mitigate carbon emissions, because now it's not only about local logging, it's also about the droughts and the dryness and the lack of water that is caused by emissions elsewhere. We are very close to the tipping point, and that's a major threat to the world.
Hello, welcome to this session. My name is Nick Breeze and I'm joined by, we're waiting for Karen Silverwood-Cope, who's the Climate Director for Brazil at the World Resources Institute. And we've got Dr. Heiko Balzer, who's Principal Land Use for Net Zero, Nature and People at Lunds Hub at the University of Leicester in the UK, and Dr. Sean Fitzgerald, the Director for the Centre for Climate Repair at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Forests, land use and agriculture account for about 20% of global emissions. More than emissions, they underscore the fabric of biodiversity, food systems, and a wide range of complex interactions, constantly interacting with the biosphere. Last year at COP28, 144 countries signed up to the Emirates Declaration on Land Use and Agriculture, signaling a decisive move towards changing how we manage and interact with these complex land-based systems to work with nature rather than against it. The two speakers that are here now, Sean and Heiko, will look at the technical approaches that are critical in understanding how we are able to understand peatland sinks without them flipping to become rich sources of carbon, adding to global warming. So I'll pass over to Heiko first.
Thank you very much. First of all, together with Professor Leanne Sutherland from the James Hutton Institute in the UK, I'm co-leading the Land Use for Net Zero, Nature and People Hub in the UK. And the hub has the mission to accelerate the transition of land use and agriculture in the UK towards net zero. So it's a really important function, and it's a new way of working. Sean, who's also on the panel, is also a member of the hub, and we work together on delivering the vision. It is a new way of working between the UK research community and the UK government and the devolved administrations in order to achieve the legal target of net zero carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, by 2050, that is enshrined in law in the UK, and the 81% net emission reduction announced by Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer at COP29 earlier this week by 2035. We do this in several innovative ways. First of all, by providing an agile policy center where we are responding from the research community with rapid access to evidence that informs policy development in government departments much, much quicker and in a more timely fashion than was ever the case before. And that is really making a step change in how we can bring our research expertise into the policy process. So it's a model I recommend for you to look at. If you're from a national delegation, please pass that on and have a look at our website, landshub.com. The second mechanism is by engaging with a wide range of stakeholders from non-governmental organizations, from the private and public sectors through a series of big tent events to build a strong coalition that drives forward the net zero agenda. We had the first big tent event just now in Edinburgh in September, and that was a real success. We had lots of people from the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also from the central government in the UK. And we worked together with non-governmental stakeholders and others as well. Now, while I do not speak on behalf of UK government, I think it is fair to say that the government in the UK recognizes the role that agriculture and forestry and other land use play in the emissions of greenhouse gases, and that we have to mitigate those emissions in order to bring the UK towards net zero by 2050. Emissions from land uses other than agriculture have actually fallen by 92% already since 1990. So there's been a lot of progress made according to the official greenhouse gas account. However, the contribution from agriculture remains stubbornly high and has only declined by 12% to a level of 48 million tons per year carbon dioxide equivalent, according to the preliminary statistics for 2023. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA in the UK, is implementing a series of new environmental land management policies in order to accelerate the transition of agriculture and other land uses to net zero. And these include a variety of new policy instruments. For example, in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland administration has recently launched a new beef carbon reduction scheme that aims to slaughter animals at a younger age to reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions from producing 1 kilogram of beef. There is a similar policy, the Peatland Code, which applies to peatlands, which Sean might elaborate on in his talk. And I wanted to just draw on, before I pass on the microphone, the role that digital technologies can play in accelerating the net zero transition. In my team, we are working on the development of digital twin technology. Digital twin is a digital live copy of an environmental system that updates itself based on continuous data streams and models that are running in the background. It is empowered by artificial intelligence and machine learning models, and it provides rapid access to information to decision makers at a point in time when it can still inform the decision-making process. And these technologies can really make a step change in our ability to take better decisions towards the net zero transition. We are trialing that for ruminant farming, for beef and dairy production in the UK, and we are trialing the same for drained peatlands and cultivated drained peatlands in particular, where there are different crop types being grown. And we cannot take them out of production entirely because the food security in the UK depends to a large degree on those areas. They're the most productive agricultural land, but they also release a lot of carbon dioxide. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Heiko. We're going to go straight to Sean, who's also working on processes.
Hello. As Heiko mentioned, I'm also involved with the Land Use for Net Zero Hub. And the Land Use for Net Zero Hub is a national scheme, so looking at actually all of our uses of land. And I'm also part of something called the Centre for Landscape Regeneration at the University of Cambridge. And in my capacity as Director of Research for Cambridge Zero, I work with that group as well. The Centre for Landscape Regeneration at the University of Cambridge looks at a subset of the landscapes that are of interest nationally, and we've got 3 of them. One of them is lowland peat, one of them is in the Cairngorms, which is in Scotland, and then one of them is in Cumbria. Now, the one that I'm going to talk about is the role of lowland peat. Now, lowland peat is an incredible environment for growing actually a large part of the UK's food. So, a large part of our salads, for example, come from where I live, in Cambridgeshire, lowland peat. And one of the challenges with this is that we've drained the peatland in order to provide a very fertile soil. But by draining the peatland, what we've then also done is we've exposed that peat to the air, and it then naturally oxidizes. And as a result of the draining of the peatland, we then have oxidation of peat then for releasing carbon dioxide. But conversely, if you don't drain the peat and you allow actually get the water table to be really, really close to the surface, in fact, how about just on the surface, then we may have heard about all of the challenges in increased wetlands around the world, and actually you then get the release of methane from those environments. And therefore there's a body of research which is looking from a scientific point of view to start with, which is looking at actually the trade-offs between the release of carbon dioxide through draining the peat and then the release of methane by actually having a water table that's particularly high. And we all know that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's responsible for about 1/3 of warming to date, so it can't be ignored, even though much of the discussions are about carbon dioxide. And then one of the things that I find of scientific interest is that because carbon dioxide is a long-lived gas, and methane actually has a relatively short half-life, it's circa 10 years, depending on the timescale of interest, looking at the impacts of climate change, is the metric that we commonly use, the global warming potential, there is then a sort of a change in the optimum water table depth that you therefore might seek to achieve. So there was a paper published by some of the team at the University of Cambridge, which involves people from the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, RSPB. And as a result of this tension between the release of carbon dioxide and release of methane, they observed that in fact it was about an 8-centimetre depth water table, which would then lead to basically the minimum impact on greenhouse gases over a 100-year timescale. But if you actually care about, for example, the impact on the climate over the next 50 years or even over the next 20 years, then the global warming potential of methane changes. Carbon dioxide does not, but therefore actually the actual optimum depth for your water table then will potentially change as a function of your time scale of interest. So that's from the scientific point of view. But by draining the soil and only having, for example, 8 centimeters of water table available, you then increase the risks, for example, to flooding. And Heiko's already referenced the fact that we need to talk about and need to think very hard about food security, but we also have the economics of our farmers and the communities and what the flooding events actually therefore mean. And therefore, we need to look at this holistically about how we're going to go and manage these lands and for whom and who benefits. Because we need to weave in the socioeconomic and in particular the economic aspects for the whole of the community and therefore arrive at strategies. And it may well be that we're going to look at different strategies of water table depth management at different times of the year, not just thinking about the carbon dioxide and methane tension, but also the overall economic aspects. And therefore, we need to think pretty seriously about things like insurance, because if you're going to have insurance against flooding events, it's effectively a form of climate finance that we need to be bringing into these discussions. So there are lots of really, really sort of thought-provoking tensions between economics as well as the climate that actually are even in places like the United Kingdom, and it's still a topic of further research. So I look forward to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. We're going to go now to the sort of macro level, the sort of iconic Amazon region, and Karen's going to give us a sort of overview of the challenges being faced, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more in the run-up to COP30 as well, so please, Karen.
Well, I'm Karen. I'm the WRI Brazil Climate Director, and WRI is a research institute across the globe. It's present in 12 countries and does research on people, climate, and nature issues. And, well, we do have great science presented here today, and we do have the challenge on how to actually scale up and accelerate the pace of solutions. And, you know, Brazil's profile of emissions of carbon is different from the rest of the world. In Brazil, over 50% of carbon emissions is associated with deforestation. Deforestation is actually a result of illegality and crime, and it's causing all sorts of damages and consequences to society, to the economy. And what we have now, as you may have seen during COP29, is Brazil presenting its policy responses to it through our National Determined Contribution, the NDC, which was presented just 2 days ago. And the NDC brings a solution to combating deforestation and reducing carbon emissions, which is all about where we are, COP29. Most of the issues are associated with combating deforestation and also promoting restoration. And with that, we would be able to reduce with zero deforestation by 2030, and that's Brazil's promises, and promoting over 12 million hectares of restoration by 2035, we'll be actually reducing emissions and achieving our goal of being of mitigating 67% by 2035. We've done a research that is called the New Economy of the Amazon, and the upside of it is that if you actually conserve the forests and you actually promote the economy of restoration, you can benefit of having more jobs. And what we found in a positive scenario is that by 2050, we would have 800,000 jobs created associated with the economy of restoration and bioeconomy. And we would be actually adding a GDP of $8 billion per year out of a positive forest-related economy. So there are net economic benefits of conserving the forests. And of course, there's need to access means of implementation to make that transformation from where we are now, which means deforestation, to a place where around 2035 and 2050 we actually curb deforestation as much as we need. And we are in a COP that is discussing basically financing mechanisms, financing goals, and that puts a lot of the salvation of the Amazon in the hands of the world, meaning that it is a matter of financing from flows from all those sources to combating deforestation and promoting restoration. So we are hopeful that with the finance deal, we will be able to finance those policies that are in place to respond to that threat that is ongoing on the Amazon. And I think a lot of other policies from other countries should also be put in place to respond to that. And we know that trade-related policies, consumption policies, and all the global chain that is associated with the forest degradation and deforestation should be reviewed and taken forward for all of the countries, apart from the UNFCCC systems, to actually preserve and conserve the Amazon. And yes, Brazil is very excited to host COP30 there. It's a COP at the Amazon. So most of you that perhaps will be there, hopefully yes, we will have the experience of being in the Amazon and seeing what it's like to get the livelihoods and the urban problems that are related of the Amazon region and how we can actually transform our lives with having a positive relationship with nature and with the forests and development. Thank you.
I'd like to ask each person a question, and then if there's time for a question from the audience. So I'll start with Heiko. You talked about the sort of the data, the digital twin. How much data feed-in points do you need? How much sensors do you need? And is there a sort of scaling limit on this, or can you keep going?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Nick. So what we currently do in the digital twin, we are feeding in satellite images from 2 different satellite missions. One of them is the European mission, Sentinel-2. That's a constellation of several satellites, and an operational mission that's going to be continued. And the second one is Landsat in the US. And we train those satellite images through a machine learning model based on eddy covariance flux tower data. So that's an instrument you place in the field, and that measures the carbon dioxide flowing from the land, from the soil, from the vegetation up into the atmosphere and back. So that gives you the net carbon dioxide flux between the land and the atmosphere. Based on all this, we can then train the model, and we have a physics model that is based on the UK land surface model, JOULES, which is the community land surface model. And we are using the variant that has a crop representation in it, so we can actually model the impact of growing different crops on the same type of soil.
And there's a lot more information on all this on your website, which is worth accessing as well. But Sean, everything you talked about with the peat bogs, I was down in southern Portugal and looking at estates down there with the regenerative work they're doing. And the key accelerator was knowledge sharing between people actually doing all this work. Have you any experience within this research of how you get it out there, how you get more people involved and engaged?
Oh, that's a key question. So one of the key hallmarks, really, of the way that research is being done at the Centre for Landscape Regeneration is actually using the data and including farmers, and not just the farmers, but the infrastructures and structures that they've got for coordinating their efforts. So buying groups, the soil associations and things like this. And it's so important. And it's not just because, that's the way to go and access the farmers. No, the farmers have got a lot to teach us too. So it's very much a two-way process about furthering knowledge. There are inherent bodies of knowledge from the local community about what things can work, what things don't, actually a real appreciation of how you go and manage risks, as well as then weaving in some of the new scientific data from some of the sensors. So sensors, not censuses, but sensors. It's a really powerful way of doing science, and especially when we're looking at nature and our relationship with nature, and using people from all parts of society who have got knowledge bases. And you can extend this even further, Nick, by looking at other areas, not just in Cambridgeshire, but indigenous groups, and the inherent knowledge that they have regarding management of land. There's a lot there that we need to include. It's not just to be respectful. No, they've got a lot of serious science behind that, which can actually inform the overall scientific community.
And one question for Karen. The Amazon is of global importance, and you mentioned consumption. Can you sort of flesh that out a bit and what do you mean by it?
Well, it's not Brazil that deforests the Amazon. It's all of us in all that we consume. What's causing deforestation is agriculture and cattle and mining. So basically, it's all that we create as habits and consumption and what goes into the global chains and trade. So that's why it's very much related to what we decide as consumers, wherever you are, or as countries on our trade relations. So I think it's a matter of having responsible behavior in our consumptions. But that's, of course, not only enough. We need to have enforcement. We need to have policy. We need to have we need to make sure that everything is in place, even means of finance, to keep forests up and running. And we should create, in fact, an economy that benefits from standing trees. And that's the magic and the beauty of the new economy of the Amazon, is how you actually create a bioeconomy that keeps growth, brings development, brings social economic development, but yet keeps forests alive.
Just very quickly, you mentioned policy. We're going to COP30. Amazon's going to be right there. What's the policy you're really looking to make this tight?
It's not at a multilateral level. I think it's means of implementation. The policy is there, it's designed, but it's always lacking finance to it. It's very expensive to combat deforestation at this point. And we do to have an economic shift on all of those global trade chains. So it is about means of implementation and securing a new consumption pattern.
Can I see if there's any questions? This lady here.
My name is Cláudia. I am from Brazil. This is a bit a side question, but I think it's important. Up to now, we have declarations, groups, and you have also many international reports about this, about the need to change the food systems, for instance, in terms of producing cattle, meat, and etc., or too much use of fertilizers and so on. And my question is this: how do you view this possibility of this question becoming part of the official agenda of the COP?
Does anyone have insight into food policies within the UNFCCC?
Yeah, we have two ways of approaching that issue. Well, you have the negotiating track under UNFCCC, which does not track thematic issues. But we do have the action agenda, right? So at COP29, we currently have 14 items of action agenda. So the thing is, we still don't know what COP30 will bring up as action agenda items. Such now we have, for instance, health and climate, cities and climate. And what you're saying is that by COP30, we should have an action agenda item that discusses food systems and climate. And yes, I think there are many pledges in that sense, but we still don't know if the presidency of COP30 will take that on forward. However, many multilateral forums and coalitions are already discussing that matter of food and climate, and there's a lot of material and also action taken in all those coalitions, which I can after tell you more about it.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to add to that there are increasing moves in the research community and also in the policy domain now to think about decarbonizing entire supply chains. So not focusing on agriculture and land use alone, but actually thinking about why is there deforestation happening? It's probably because people are wanting to produce soybeans or beef or something else that is then being exported or consumed by people. And so we need to think about policies like the European Deforestation Regulation and how that is being implemented, that is seeking to ensure deforestation-free supply chains in all the produce that is being imported into the European single market. There are similar policies under consideration in the UK and possibly in other countries that I'm not aware of. But those are very interesting approaches that look at the whole food system as an integrated system from the production side to the consumption side.
And I'm just going to add I think your question is really, really important. And the critical words were food system and not food. because it can get quite difficult by telling people what they can and can't eat in terms of just the here and now. And we can do that through education, but by telling people that they can't eat certain things is a very, very difficult path to navigate politically. But on the food system side, you can then start influencing what actually does make sense for people to eat, maybe through pricing and things like that. So your question revealed quite a lot in terms of it is about the system and the decarbonisation and everything associated with that, which can then impact actually our diets.
Are there any other questions?
Tell us about how close you think we are to tipping points of the Amazon. And if it does tip over and we lose all the forest, we're going to get grasslands and savanna growing there, no longer forests.
Well, it is a very important question. We are very close to the tipping point, and that's a major threat to the world because it's a disruption on the stability of the climate system across the globe. And what is happening when I say tipping point is actually that the tropical forest is becoming a savanna. So it's getting so degraded and so fragmented where you have pieces of forest remains amongst loads of big areas of degraded lands that actually is losing its capability of restoring itself and growing secondary vegetation. So that's what we call the tipping point of, in fact, making a tropical forest becoming a savanna. And it's getting more likely every day. And it doesn't matter how much actually forest we conserve at the moment if we don't mitigate carbon emissions, because now it's not only about local logging, it's also about the droughts and the dryness and the lack of water that is caused by emissions elsewhere, because it's a whole integrated system, right? So that's why we have to do it all at the same time. Curb deforestation, which is a locally led activity, but also emissions across the globe. Otherwise, the Amazon will not recover and we will lose tropical forests in the world forever.
So we're always coming back to carbon emissions, cutting fossil fuels. Okay, well, I'll just say thank you then to the Institute for International Ecological Economics as part of the Facing Future series for letting us have this session. Thank you as well to the speakers who have been very insightful. Thank you.